morning, everyone. I flew in from Copenhagen yesterday, and I was sitting reading a Harvard Business Review about Steve Jobs, who I suppose you all know. And there were two things that I thought was interesting in what he said, and which I briefly want to share with you before I start. The first thing he said was people who know what they're talking about, they don't need PowerPoints. I have already made a PowerPoint, so I hope that's okay. The other thing which I thought was very interesting and relevant for this forum is he said that people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the people who do. So I think we must be the crazy people sitting in here hoping to change the world. I am going to tell you a little bit about a project that I am managing at the moment about green business model innovation. The points I'll go through is briefly why companies are doing it, what do they get out of it, what kind of companies are working with it. I have a few case examples and some very first results that we have found about these companies, and also a few ideas about policies that can promote green business model innovation. The project is founded by Nordic Innovation and also by the Danish Business Authority. There are several partners on this project. I am hired by Fora, which is part of the Danish Business Authority. I have myself worked in Fora for many years as well, so in that sense it's not all that strange maybe. We've all heard the stories that companies are the bad ones. They are the reasons for us having problems with, pollution and so on. And all the challenges, environmental challenges we face are because of companies. But at the same time, companies are also part of the solution. Without companies' innovation, we are not going to be able to move on. So that is why we started this project, was to find out, well, how can companies participate with changing their business models to help solve some of these global challenges we all face. We started in August last year, and we're not finished yet, so I can't tell you about all our results, because I don't have them, but I'll share some of the first insights. So what is green business model innovation? That's the big question. We have said that that is innovation in business models that result in a decreased environmental impact. But I have to say, of course, at the same time, it has to be innovations that make financial sense, like any innovation. Companies have to be able to make money. That's what they're there for, or one of the things that they're there for, anyway. At the same time, I mean, there are many companies today we call green tech or clean tech companies that innovate by making new technology. And that innovation in itself helps, reduce these environmental challenges, such as electrical cars or windmills, solar panels, and so on. But we wanted to look at other types of companies. We believe that all companies can be able to do something good for the environment. And that's sort of what we started out looking at. What is that then? If they don't produce windmills or electrical cars, but what can they do? What can they do, these companies? And we believe that, or I believe personally anyway, that all companies can change things in the way they do business to have, to decrease the effect they have on the environment. We narrowed it down very much to looking at two types of business models. One is what we call life cycle models. I'll show you a little bit more in detail. Those are very product focused, but we also have what we call functional sales models, or product service systems, some call it as well, which obviously then are more service focused. I am sure we have not identified all the green business models in the world. We have, on the life cycle models, found these four, which we thought were interesting. That is green supply chain management, take-back management, cradle to cradle, and industrial symbiosis, which also were mentioned earlier today. The three first ones are related to one company and how they themselves can work with their business model at changing things. While the last one, an industrial symbiosis, requires partnerships with several companies. So in that sense, they're not at the same level, you could say. When it comes to functional sales, functional sales is basically, instead of selling someone a product, you sell the function of the product. And there are several examples for that. Some very specific examples are related to, say, ESCO companies, energy-saving companies, or material-saving companies, water-saving companies, chemical services management companies, CMS, and also design, build, finance, operate companies. If we look at the business models when it's business as usual, it's a very linear way of thinking. You extract your resources, you design a product, you make it, you sell it, distribute it, someone uses it and gets rid of it. And this story is very well described in the Story of Stuff. I don't know if you've heard about that, but that's definitely a website worth checking out. You become a bit stressed and desperate after looking at that video. So we tried to say, well, could you look at the business model from a different perspective, where it's basically a cycle instead of a linear system? So going through each one, companies working with green supply chain management, they focus on the resources that come into the production. It can be all the way from the beginning when you extract the resources. How can you do that? Focus can also be on using less resources. That, of course, minimizes the environmental impact. It also minimizes costs most often. And it could also be looking at alternative resources. So there are many ways in that sense of looking at the green supply chain management. Companies that work with take-back management, that is sort of after the product is used, they are focusing on taking back their products and reusing them again. And of course, it's important for them to also think, well, what are the old products used for again as resources? But they mightn't do that in their own company. Some companies might just be taking back old products and selling them on to others, while other companies might be taking them back and using them in their own production. If we then look at companies who have embraced cradle to cradle, they try to look at the whole circle, where they look at how the resources are extracted and used. Focuses very much then, of course, on resources that can be used again. Products have to be designed in the right way so that they can be reused. And when they are disposed of and taken back into the company again, they have to be easy to, be taken apart and put into the whole production process again. The reason I haven't highlighted the sales and the use phase is because companies working with cradle to cradle, they don't really have an influence on how the users use the product. They take over again when the users are finished using their products. And then is the last one, which is industrial symbiosis, which, as I said before, requires several companies going together, and where their focus is very much on what is the waste of one company, how can that be used as a resource for another company. So that's very much the sort of disposal and resource areas where they look at their companies working on industrial symbiosis. Looking at the functional sales models, that is more then on the use of the product, where we have, as I said, ESCO and CMS and so on. Instead of focusing on the product that is sold, they have a long-term relationship with the customer and are interested in optimizing the whole process when the product is being used. And in the case of design, build, finance, operate, it's very much looking at, from designing the building, it's most often buildings, How can they be designed efficiently and used efficiently throughout the lifespan of the building? So that is sort of the framework that we have used on the two types of business models. So the big question is, well, why are companies using these types of business models? We've seen this graph already before. Andrea presented, not exactly the same one, but similar one. And funnily enough, they all sort of peak there at the end. This one is input prices for companies. And I suppose the big question is, why is this happening? One reason anyway is, say, a mobile phone. I mean, how many of you have a mobile phone? And how many have you had since they came out on the market? 10? 15? 3? Wow. I must have had 10 by now, I think. And how many have you taken back to the shop? Okay, yeah, well done. Most people don't do that. Maybe 10% of people today take their mobile phones back to the shop. So that basically means that all those rare materials that are in those mobile phones, they get thrown away. And that, of course, means that the prices of those materials are going to go up and up as they become harder to find. So that is a very simple example anyway. So companies today, I mean, they're realizing, okay, that's pretty stupid. We have all these resources in our products. Why are we throwing them away? Can we not get them back in again? And that, of course, is not to save the world, but it's to reduce their cost. At the same time, we have stricter regulation. We have already seen many examples of that, so I don't really need to give any examples. I mean, one example that I put up was the eco-design regulation from the EU, where all, I think they call hard white goods, they now have to have a 5-year guarantee. So basically, a few years ago, you only needed a 2-year guarantee. That means that all these companies, they need to figure out how can these products now last for 5 years instead of 2 years. So that's going to require some business model innovation, I think. At the same time, we also have more and more demanding customers. The dark blue line is the amount of people who say that they want to buy greener products. Of course, you can say they don't buy it at any price. But there's more to demonstrate that there is awareness among consumers today. They do want companies to behave properly. Investors are also placing demands on companies now. Harvard Business School made a study last year where they recorded how many searches were done on sort of the environmental aspects of companies by investors. And the one that came up the highest was environmental and social metrics. So more and more investors are also thinking that they want to invest in companies that behave properly. And of course also employees. There are plenty of studies showing that the new generation, Generation Y, they want to have a job that is meaningful. They are not so interested in working for Shell and those types of companies anymore. So there are plenty of reasons anyway for companies to make these changes. And then you can say, well, what are companies doing then? Some of them are taking on these challenges and thinking, okay, let's use them as innovation opportunities. And what we want to look at in our study is, what does that mean for Nordic companies? Do Nordic companies have a competitive advantage? I mean, if you look at our lifestyle in the Nordic countries, we are used to high quality. We enjoy high quality and design. We have a high standard of living, which we want to keep. We're not interested in too much pollution and so on. So, you know, it's deep in our culture, this way of thinking, and our, as you mentioned earlier as well, welfare. So we are looking now to find out in our study if there are any reasons to believe that Nordic companies have a competitive advantage. So I'll show you some very boring graphs, because I'm an analyst from our case studies. We interviewed 40 companies in the Nordic countries, as well as internationally. Oh no, I'll give you some case examples first, and then I'll give you the boring graphs. One of the companies that we interviewed was Volvo from Sweden. They have started operating functional sales instead of just selling parts, this is for aviation engines for planes and stuff. Instead of just selling these parts, they have found out that customers are interested in leasing these engines. When I first heard that, I thought, is it possible to take the engine out of a plane and just lease that and not the whole plane? And it is. I didn't know that. And what Volvo then offers is they offer the service of that engine working, which means that they are responsible for the maintenance, for keeping it clean. They deliver the engineers that come and take care of it. So basically, the plane companies, they don't need to think about having specialists who can tune these engines and make them work. They can leave that to Volvo. IKEA, another Swedish company, they have started, putting pretty strict requirements on all of their suppliers. So if they are going to purchase any new resources, they have to meet at least 10 criteria, which are environmentally based and, socially responsibly based, among others. It's very similar to the case of Walmart. A Danish company, Gabriel, they produce textiles. They have made a new textile called Gaia, which is cradle to cradle. It's made of wool fibers that contains no toxins or anything at all. And if you want to, you could actually throw that out into the nature and it would decompose and it wouldn't do any harm. They're also working with a product called Silent Solution, which is very strange. It's a textile that actually absorbs sound, and it's made from recycled bottles and wool. They are, at the moment, you can say they haven't quite figured out how to get that back into production again, but they are working on it. And the last case, which is from Holland, is a carpet manufacturer called Desso. They take back all used carpets. It doesn't have to be just their own, it could also be from their competitors. And they use the top of the carpet again, the sort of yarn. They reuse that. So all of Desso's, so 60% of Desso's carpets are now based on reused yarn. And the back of the carpet they sell to people that make roads or roofing or other things. So that's just some examples of what some companies are doing anyway. And then I'll show you some boring graphs from the 40 case studies. One thing that we have noticed is it seems to be quite big companies that are working on this. And also from the examples I showed, you can see, I mean, Volvo, IKEA, that's big companies. So why that is, I don't know, but we're working on that. We also asked them what kinds of skills and competencies do you need in your company if you want to do this. And we saw that most companies, maybe because they're the big companies, they do it themselves. They have in-house resources to do that. But there are two interesting stories, though. That is, there are also university partnerships and company partnerships. Meaning that these companies have also figured out that they can't do it on their own. So that, I think, anyway, is a rather interesting story. We also asked these companies, well, you know, what do you get out of it? What are sort of the financial results? And more than 70% said that they actually have a positive financial result out of this. Some of them could not measure it yet, about 20%. And one company said that they had negative results. And when we asked why, that's because they said, yeah, well, you know, it's a long-term investment. In 2014, then we'll break even. And that's fair enough. But I thought that I was pleasantly surprised, I have to say. And we also asked about environmental results. And all the companies said, yes, we have positive environmental results. And these are just some of the examples. I mean, they reduced the amount of raw materials, they reduced the amount of energy they used, they reduced the amount of waste, the amount of resources like energy or water and so on, and also the amount of toxins used. What we're also looking at in the study, which I will not spend too much time on, we have been trying to look at what policies are there currently to promote specifically these kinds of business model innovations. In order for that to make sense, we have also been looking at what barriers do these companies face. And I will not go through the barriers now, but I'll briefly touch on some of the policies. When we look at policies at a general level, the only one we could find was in Denmark. And Christian will tell you more about that in a second, so I won't go into that. When we looked at policies on a very specific level for life cycle models, we saw that there is some things happening on the cradle-to-cradle area. There's a cradle-to-cradle network in the EU. Holland has a waste management plan, and the UK also have a waste and resource action program. What's interesting is that cradle-to-cradle, looks at the entire life cycle of a product, yet these policies are very much focused on waste. So maybe there is a gap there to expand in other areas of the value chain. In respect to industrial symbiosis, there's also policies in Denmark and in the UK where focus is very much on facilitating meetings between these companies. Because if you sit as a single company, it's very hard for you to figure out, well, what waste do other companies have that is useful to me? So they have very much a sort of facilitating role, those networks. And looking at the functional sales models in relation to ESCO, there's both in the US, in the UK, and in Denmark policies. The ones in the UK and Denmark, they're quite new, so it's hard to say anything about how they work. The Federal Energy Management Program in the US has been running since the 70s, and they have amazing effects that they can show to energy reduction in the use of the public buildings. When it comes to chemicals, we could only find one in the EU, which is called REACH, that is related to, companies. They have to register what chemicals they use, which of course helps to make them more aware of it. And they also have to come up with, if they have dangerous chemicals, they have to come up with long-term strategies for replacing these chemicals. And finally, the design, build, finance, operate business model was only the UK that actively has made policies to go in and promote those types of business models. So, yeah. Finally, what we're doing in the project is we're also looking at tools that companies can use. We're looking at our 40 case studies and saying, well, what's best practice from them? What can other companies learn from them? To help them get started. So our approach is, let's see what we can do for policy. Let's see if we can find some tools. And then the big question is, can they then go on their own? Maybe Christian can help us with that question as well. Thank you.